Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. As you can see, we are going to review one more of those movies that I think is extremely important as a predictive programming model for our futures. But man, I haven't seen this movie in a long time, and I'll tell you what, there's a huge difference between making an episode like this and actually just sitting down and watching a movie because you like it. This movie is unlike any movie you have ever seen in your life. It is it's almost hard to believe that George Lucas made this movie as his first movie as a student film and then got permission to make it as a feature film. Because the script is just wild. In documenting the film, what I'm trying to do is to not only recall the film for you, we're going to go through the whole thing from start to finish. It's made in 1971, stars the impeccable actor Robert Duvall. It has another actor named Donald Pleasence, who's a very famous actor for the time. He was in, I believe, Twilight Zone. There's a couple guys from Twilight Zones. Don Pedro Cooley. The love interest is Maggie McOmi. I'm sure I'm saying that wrong. And Ian Wolfe, who was definitely in at least one Twilight Zone. Let me set up this film for you. The reason why I put this on my list of predictive programming movies, and that I believe that this is a complete orchestration of what it could be in the near future. Sorry, not near future. This one goes out probably 100 years. It just depends on how much successes they have in the world as to whether or not this will be one that comes early or late. There were definitely more human factors to the story than I thought were there, but there's definitely the layers of people who are completely sedated in this world by drugs. And they're worker bees. And you can tell they've been raised in that worker bee world. They don't know anything else other than what the state has told them. Instead of being a Russian doll, they're a Prussian doll. Babies at one level of this film are grown in jars, and so no one remembers their mother. Remember, this movie was released in 1971. Original story by George Lucas. Logan's Run, made and released in 1976 based on another book, had a similar situation. We just covered it, right? Where Logan's Run is fun and pretty and cool and absolutely the essence of the 70s, which is why you have to see it. Rollerball is a little bit more serious. THX is a film that creates a texture and a lighting system and an image system that is anything but where you would ever want to be for a split second. There is no scene in this movie where you would want to be in the movie. Logan's Run, you could see yourself, in various realms wanting to be in some of the amenities of that world. Rollerball, most definitely being in the crowd or being a rollerball yourself or being an executive. You could see yourself in those couple films. Soylent Green, you could see yourself in it. You probably wouldn't want to be in it, but this world, no, you don't want to have anything to do with this world. Now, when they talk about 15-minute cities, when they talk about potentially reducing world population down to these 15-minute cities, and there's only a few of them where you see major cities today, that concept is difficult to digest. But when you really try to take it to the next level of, well, what would be in those cities? Just take a or take a telescope from space and Google Earth, right? And drive it into one of these cities where everyone else is gone. 97% of the world's gone, 99%. And you just go into one of these underground cities, because it's underground. That way, the elite of the world get to enjoy the surface, right? But as soon as you penetrate the crust layers, there's THX 1138. And this movie is brilliantly put together to illustrate this world. On one level, you could watch this film and you'd be like, man, it's so chaotic and so strange and so asymmetrical in terms of normal storytelling. I don't get it, or I get what they tried to do, what George tried to do, but I don't like it. What's interesting about it is that when I talk to people, and I really talk to people about living in the 40s, living in the 50s, living in the 60s, and I say, could we make a movie today about what it would be like to be in those decades? The wisest people tell me, oh no, there's no way you can do it. The only thing you could do is watch old movies from those decades and hope that it's not some Leave It to Beaver caricature of the time, even though I've had people tell me it was very much like Leave It to Beaver. What George has done is he has conceptualized what this world would be like, and then he lived in it in his mind, almost like Tesla creating a machine in his head. He lived in it, and then when he made his choices from a production standpoint, a casting standpoint, the way that the characters appear, the very fascist world, everyone has shaved heads. That way no one can contest that someone has a better hairdo than them. Well, this guy's going bald. This guy has hair. It's not fair. Nobody has any fashion. They wear white clothing. Very simple little tops and bottoms. Almost like scrubs from a hospital, but all white. Therefore, no one has fashion that someone else doesn't have. Amenities of life, well, you go to work and you come home. You have what's called a roommate. You're not supposed to make love because babies are made in jars, and love is considered a perversion, a religious conviction perversion, which will just lead to society falling apart according to them. See, you see, anywhere there's a microscopic loss of control, it's illegal. That's what a oppressionistic system always gravitates to. Now, the people who create those rules, they live outside the bubble. They live physically outside of those 15-minute underground bunker cities, and they can do whatever they want. But your genetics didn't make it because you didn't fight back. I'm not sure how to say this guy's last name, but Walter Murch, M-U-R-C-H, is the other contributor to the screenplay. I'm assuming at this early age, he probably contributed a lot. Now, what's interesting about it is if you don't know about this concept or this history, George Lucas made a student film. Someone saw the student film. It is not this movie. And you can watch that movie on YouTube if you'd like. And then they greenlit this film. He was early in his career, let's just put it that way. But honestly, there's nothing student film about this movie. Quite the contrary. Now, the movie starts off with sort of a bizarre tribute to Buck Rogers, similar to the sort of the montage they had created for Soylent Green, where they're showing you the world prior to this crazy overpopulated New York City with 40 million people in it. This starts off with some Buck Rogers, talks about some technology, and then rolls into the film. It's really strange. It never really connects with the movie. It just must have been some student choice of George Lucas. Now, George Lucas gets his break by visiting Francis Ford Coppola's set, and he's standing on the sidelines, and he's looking around, and the ADs, the assistant directors, are trying to set things up, but they're screwing things up, and George is obviously a very intuitive, young film director, so he's looking around, and he's suggesting corrections in such an authoritative way that the ADs start doing everything that George says, mistaking him as some executive producer, assistant director that's closer to Coppola. Then Coppola finally says, hey, I told you to do this. Why'd you do that? And they said, well, that guy over there told us to change it. And he goes, well, who's that guy? He says, I don't know. I thought he was working for you. And so he has George come over. They have a conversation, and he agrees with George's changes to his set. I don't know what movie that was, but that's what gets him going. And Francis Ford Coppola is an executive producer on this show, on this movie. What the movie does in the beginning, and we're going to go all the way to the end, and believe me, it doesn't matter. You will get more out of the film if you watch this episode than if you just willy-nilly watch it by yourself, because you will be able to see what I've seen, either agree with it or not agree with it, and then you'll see more than I have described and see more than I saw, because I'll take out the low-hanging fruit for you, which is not exactly as low as you might think. But they're trying to illustrate the world that this group of people live in. You're not sure who it knows who in this place, but it's focusing on Robert Duvall working in a factory. You start to see the police. So the players in this movie are the worker bees at different levels. There are some folks that are working inside these stalls. They're stand-up stalls, and what they are doing through the glass, they're this like almost like they took the general design of creating plutonium, but instead of plutonium inside there, they're creating these robots, but they have very delicate processes of moving the power supplies, which are these looks like uranium rods that are about 2.5 inches long, about 1/2 inch square. And they have to pick them up and move them in place, and it's all really toxic to work with the insides of these robots. Of course, that's all nonsense, but in that we use these rods all the time, and they're very shielded, and it's not a problem. In fact, you would never have to handle anything that's really hot. Now, I watched the director's cut just recently, and that was the last version of the film I saw. So I went back and watched the scenes that had changed. There's 9 minutes and about 40 seconds of scenes that have been upgraded. The upgraded director's cut is phenomenal. They took the original negative, and my gosh, any version of the film you had seen prior, I can lay down and take a nap. They didn't mess up anything. They inserted a lot of little scenes here and there just to give it more narrative. And it looks like George meticulously made changes to this film that just improve it 100%. I do not have the same opinion about him improving the Star Wars franchises, and that he left some of the weakest links. He left the weakest links in those movies and then fiddled with scenes that didn't need to be fiddled with. So when I say that he got THX 1138 correct, he did. Now, there's a group of people that actually do the work, and it seems to be predominantly male, and then there's a predominantly female group of folks that are more of the logistics people handling operations, using the computers to set up the parts and pieces that are automated in this process. Then there's people that are one layer up that are watching everybody. And they still look exactly the same. They have different headsets, and they talk a little bit more normal. Eventually we'll hear a fourth layer that is even higher up, and they sound just like us, talking totally normal. It's a very interesting little moment there. What he is illustrating there is not only is there class structure, but there is educational structure and essentially intellectual structure. Now, there's an authoritative layer inside this film, and it's portrayed by these very tall, sort of California CHP, California Highway Patrol. Just take like a Chips with Eric Estrada, and then put some super lean guys in, and their bodies are all made of chrome. But they're wearing a full leather gear, like they're about to jump on their bike and start policing the highway. They also have the helmet, but their face is all chrome, almost like a mannequin set of features, very, very basic, no eyes or anything, but it's the indentation. It's more of like an impression. And so at the beginning of the film, you start to see these cops walking around, and they talk strange. Their voices are at all different levels of tone. Some of them talk completely normal, of all the human tones that you might hear. And for some reason, there's some voices that are pitched up, almost like chipmunks. It's really kind of odd. Not quite at that level, but they sound strange. Now, what's happening in this beginning is it's a montage. But it is not, doesn't have music soundtrack on it and some South Park soundtrack on it. What it is they're full scenes cut very quickly together, so you can kind of see the cycle of what's going on. Duvall's at work. There's a particular woman in a monitor watching him. Then there seems to be some personal moments with them together. But then it's cutting back to police officers walking around and working with society. There's a reoccurring theme in the first half of this film to illustrate the Brave New World Alex Huxley drug regimen that they've got planned for us in the future, which is to remain sedated. And he's invented all of these sort of phantom drugs in the movie. I'll mention a couple of them, but it's not important because I don't think they're real at all. But what you do is you take a sedation pill to keep you from ever, wanting to break out. It's probably some fluoride Xanax thing. But then you take a Ritalin type pill, which keeps you super duper focused, because when they're in these stalls, when the men are in these stalls, and they illustrate it by showing an accident at the beginning of the film that is really well done. It blows out a bunch of stalls and kills one whole group of guys building this robot in one part of the factory, whereas next door, down a different corridor, everyone's fine. And it's because someone screwed up the power system, dropped one of these uranium bars, and it gets toxic, and it starts a chain reaction, which is absurd in the first place. What, are you going to get fission or something? But it's dangerous work. And without the sedation and without this Ritalin pill, it's difficult to do this work. You will have the shakes. You'll think too much, and you need to be like a robot yourself to build a robot. The irony between the two is actually very interesting. Now, Robert Duvall, in case you're wondering, what the hell does THX 1138 mean? And obviously, George has used this all over the place. THX was the sound system company he created, 1138s, in all of his films. THX 1138 is Duvall's character's name. It's so much his name that when in one particular scene in the film, which we'll get to, this preface is going to allow us to go a little quicker through the film. His wife calls him THX, almost like Tex, right? So it's pronounced. She is Luh, or Lu. But the theme that's immediately showing up is that they're going to their medicine cabinet in their bathroom. And every single time they open the medicine cabinet, an AI voice talks to them and says, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And there's a video camera on the other side. And there's a human command center which is watching them to see why they're going into their cabinet, because that has all their drugs. And if they can't sleep, they're allowed to take a little bit of drug. So he starts opening his medicine cabinet a lot, and that's where they break out of the montage. They're setting it up, and then they finally use that to bust out. But what's interesting is that this voice is essentially giving pharmaceutical advice on the other side. And he kind of bails out. As soon as they open it up, he looks and he realizes he's being recorded and he doesn't want to cause any problems. And so he'll stare at the camera for a little while and everything's fine. But there's a warning very quickly in the beginning of the movie. Very, very brave new world, which is if he doesn't take the drugs that are prescribed for him, he can get a drug charge of negligent drug consumption. So the opposite of today, where you get a drug charge if you take drugs, you can get a drug charge if you don't take your sedation pills, if you don't take the medicine that's supposed to calm you down before work. But red sector L14 is the one that explodes. And that also shakes us out of this montage, getting us going. And it's about 10 minutes of this montage that just continues and continues, just very short little clips to essentially drive you in. It's like when Tron 1982 started falling through the grid, right? And they did the transformation from our world into the grid so that you would divorce yourself from this world. And that's what Lucas did brilliantly. And the length of this is a very important length. It's just like Saving Private Ryan. The beach scene, Omaha Beach, is to shake you out of the world that you just walked out of to go into the movie theater to experience this. So they literally just put you in a state of trauma with Saving Private Ryan. Now, the explosion could be contested as that trauma moment because this is 1971. And for those of you who didn't grow up in that era, you don't just drop a movie with full frontal nudity on a woman. You don't use the F-bomb lightly. You don't have a rape scene. You don't have really gory deaths. I mean, it's not normal. When a film crosses those lines, society pushes back. And it can get a rating that's so bad that you'd have to be 21 to see it. Like Ralph Bakshi, who made Fritz the Cat and then he made Heavy Traffic. He had 2X ratings on his cartoons. Well, once you have an X rating, you think that's showing up in your local cinema? No. You're going to have to watch it in some wild animation festival or some weird theater, and it won't be truly an X-rated movie in any way, shape, or form. Cats had sex in Fritz the Cat, and these crazy characters kind of had sex in Heavy Traffic. But the main reason why Ralph Bakshi gets these X ratings is he was going against Disney, and they just made a phone call, and that screwed him over. It wasn't until he made Wizards that he broke out. But sadly, 45 days after Wizards is wrapping the theater in lines, Star Wars comes out, George Lucas, and they throw every other movie out of the theater and put Star Wars in every single theater. And so Ralph lost probably $5 to $10 million in revenue because of Star Wars. But this sector blows up, and what happens is where Duvall's working, you hear over the PA, they're announcing that this explosion has happened, that radiation leakage got bad and blew up. But the big spin is they've had nearly 250 deaths in that department in the last month, and we've only had 190 something. So keep going. You're doing great. So they spun it positive, and they eventually announced that I believe 63 people died on the other side. And then they start showing you pulling the bodies out of that area. And it's not very specific, but there's only one little body or one scene, one body that gets pulled out. But for 1971, it was leaving so much to the imagination, it really was crossing some lines, I thought. But it was necessary because he's showing you not only that this happens in this world, but the big punch in that scene is that no one really seems to be affected by it. People got killed. Everyone's sedated. Everyone has the focus drug. Just clean it up. We got to start over. So it's Duvall. The movie slows down when Duvall gets off work. And you've now heard a lot of noise. You've seen a lot of scenes. You don't really know what's going on quite just yet, you know. You know some basics. And he's walking down a corridor, and it's quiet for the first time in this film. And of course, he's got to go through a little bit of a checkpoint to get out of the factory. And there's this really strange little thing that happens where he is at a booth just before he leaves the door. And Lucas, in the director's cut, I watched the two scene change. He was so meticulous that the writing on the door bothered him. It was sort of some alien gula numbers and stuff, and he had it completely re-rendered with the live actions character of the cop kind of just coming through the door and walking off. And he just put a big number 3 on the door. It was beautiful. I mean, the CG was really astounding. But Robert Duvall's got this little tetrahedron, this little red cube with him. And they don't really explain it. But apparently this cube is a phone. It's a phone that he used to call Lou, his wife. Well, it's not really his wife. They call her roommates. Wife would suggest what we know to be sacred, right? One thing the elite are trying to do is destroy that whole union, right? I mean, why do you think they want everyone just kind of having contracts with each other and not really a marriage? You don't really love your husband or your wife. And kids, oh God, don't have those things, right? Look how overpopulated the world is, although you could fit 8 billion people in a giant field in Kansas, right? But Robert doesn't look too good, and we know he's been visiting his medicine cabinet. As well, his roommate, Lou, has been visiting the cabinet, much less than he is, but she doesn't seem to be that comfortable with where they are as well. Now, this next scene is one that I have mentioned in several episodes, but it was interesting when I got a chance to see it again. He goes to this booth. It's sort of like a really large phone booth, maybe like a third of a bus stop booth. But you get in and it's closed in. And there's sort of an Eastern Orthodox portrait of Christ, really zoomed up on a gel on the wall, and it's just backlit. And he goes in and he whispers something for a second, which is a little odd, and then he starts his confession. And he's starting to confess that he doesn't feel that well, and he's not comfortable with his roommate, and he doesn't really know her that well, and they're not really in love. They don't really have any affection or anything in common. And this AI is sitting there like a magic 8-ball, just giving him canned responses. Yes. Okay. Yeah, okay, I understand. And then eventually it says at the end, towards the end, it goes, could you be more specific? And that's going to come back. But he feels like he is so Prussianistic. He feels like for the very first time in this world, someone is pretending to pay attention to him, because in this world, nobody pays attention to you. So even having an AI with canned responses, he's not understanding that every single time he goes in this booth, it's the same exact statements in the same exact order with the same exact pregnant pauses between them. That scene is so huge. I don't know if George knew. I'm sure he did. But he's so young, right? He's so utterly young with this brilliance that he understood that if you do condition the human mind away from humanity, you're going to get them to the point where that flimsy interaction is going to be considered just as good as any interaction. It's quite insane, actually. But he talks about having made a mistake at work. Couldn't believe he made a mistake at work. Like, there's zero margin for error. Thought that was interesting. This is when he talks about taking pineyrol, which is, or Pinerol. And he talks about taking this drug to get to sleep. It's interesting how the drug name is talking about the pineal gland. But now the interesting thing is when he leaves this booth, the last phrases out of this robot Christ AI written by a third grader is that instead of saying, I'm God, I'm the Son of God, you were created in his image, you are wonderful, it says, in place of God, it says the masses. The masses created you in their image. The masses this, the masses that, right? Now they break for a split second to show you a scene where one of these cops is surrounded by some little kids who are fascinated by these cops. And he's got this deep voice. On this particular one, he goes, okay, I'll let you hold it, but it's kind of heavy. And he lets them hold this billy club from the cop. Now, there's two types of weapons that these cops use. One is a billy club to obviously pound you. And then there's long cattle prods that are black. And there's nothing fancy about them. There's no electrical animation in this movie. He just has a little bit of a sound effect. And they prod you for reasons that we're going to get into. They have more function than just guiding you down a path. Now, before he gets home, his roommate, Lou, L-U-H, she is asking for more drugs, slightly more than what is normally regimented. He comes home, and it's just one of these awkward moments. He doesn't want to be with her. She's seemingly hurt. You could tell it in her face. It's like you kind of sense that she wants to be with him, but she knows she's got to respect their differences. He sits down in front of a television unit, which is a wall hologram. I mean, the foresight in Lucas was great. And even though he redid some of the visual effects to make them better, he has, in 1971, 100% holographic kind of unit against the wall. So the characters appear in front of the wall. The wall isn't the hologram at all. Not like Back to the Future or Total Recall, where the kitchen wall was the screen, right? But he is watching an African woman dance fully naked. And she's kind of a Blade Runner 2049, apparition. And it was that way in 71. They redid that. They took the principal footage of all of these hologram characters, and they had ILM remastered better effects and leave them more crisp and clean than the very faded out version that was in 71, which was brilliant in 71 because he didn't have ILM. He had to get a cheap way to make it read correctly. And for 71, it must have been jaw-dropping to see some of this. But in the original film, he is laying back against the wall and he is pleasuring himself off camera. He still has his shirt on. But in the director's cut, this machine comes down from the ceiling and attaches to his body, and there's a piston thing going on while the wife's in the kitchen, and she opens this little pantry and pulls out this TV dinner thing that they're supposed to be eating, and she peels it off, and where the pudding would be, It's like 4 or 5 different pills. Now, there's a meal in there too, but she swaps one of the pills for this other pill. It's red, and it looks like some of the anti-acid pills we had in the 70s. It was huge horse pill, though. And then she puts it back in the cupboard. And she comes in the room, and he is now toured through some lectures. He's off the woman, and which means time has passed because he had to, get finished up with his little routine there. And he's just touring. The black eye comes on. He's dancing. He's for the women, and he quickly goes through that one. And then he gets to this video of a cop beating one person. And it's just, what, boom, what, boom. And he settles on that. He is watching a cop beat up somebody on the ground. And it's a hologram. I mean, it's not 100% real. There's scan lines in it. But he chooses that. And the psychological makeup of a human being that wants to watch another human being be tortured is the result of impressionistic mind conditioning. Again, all humanity removed, all humanity made illegal, all serving the state becoming mandatory. Drugs, Brave New World. If you don't take the drugs, you get a charge. So in that sedated brain, coming off also the drug, the second drug, which allows them to be more focused at work, this is the kind of stuff he wants to watch. But she seems to be very lucid, very different than him. He goes off to get his food. She changes the channel, gets it off this torture stuff, puts it on a funny little program that kind of looks like a comedy that they would have created in this impressionistic world. And in this world, they have this really super cool car. It's a real car. I forgot the name of it, but it looks like a Le Mans kind of car where you might race for 24 hours, right? And it's 2 guys talking to each other about, hey, man, where'd you get this car? Well, did you steal this car or something like that? Yeah, no, I had it given to me, and everyone's laughing. It's barely anything funny. And he says, when I got the car, I drove through a crowd at the allocation center. Oh, you did? He goes, well, I didn't hit anybody, but I did this, and it's not very funny, but they're just canned laughter on the track, and he comes in with his meal, and he's like, why'd you change it? And she says, I don't know, it seemed like that was not that great, right? And she goes, eat your dinner and take your pills. So he notices that pill that she put in there. It's some pack they've got. And he looks at her, and he puts it in, he takes it. She calls it the sedation pill. At that point, he kind of tells her, he goes, look, I'm watching that because I don't feel very well. He was watching the torture clip because he didn't feel very well, because that made him feel better. Well, think about all these people that watch, American Greed, those true crime things. You want to watch anyone have a bad day in the celebrity realm. It makes you feel better about yourself. Now, we have a little microcosm of that today that's blown up all over the place on television. But that's 50 years ago, 53 years ago, right, that this is happening in this movie. At least when you wrote it on paper. Now it's the way we live our life. TMZ, all these, isn't it great? Someone rich just lost a son, or they got divorced, or they're going to jail for some reason. I'm not saying some of these people don't earn it. So they finish up the evening, and she is actually now milking that medicine cabinet so much, she's starting to get warnings about overdosing, which will get her in trouble. He goes back to the AI, the Jesus AI. This time he's really not doing well. And he's a little nonsensical in his statements. He's talking about all these little things that are bothering him, and he's gagging like he's sick. And eventually, he hurls inside the booth and throws up. And this is when we really notice the AI is repeating itself. Because here's a guy getting sick inside the booth, throwing up. He throws up, and that script comes back around. Could you be more specific? He just threw up. There's nothing to be specific. Oh, okay, I don't know. But again, he is so conditioned, he doesn't notice. That's what's important. And that's what's utterly brilliant about George Lucas in his 20s. All right. The script is so intense and so predictive programming that I don't know what world George Lucas could claim he had lived in to write this script, other than maybe he read Brave New World and then utterly obsessed on this between the time he found that book and the time he made this film, which in his age bracket, he might have had 10, 12 years to achieve that enlightenment at that age. It's almost like someone gave him the script and said, hey, kid, you know, you're nobody right now, but if you want to be somebody, you make Grandpa Rothschild's movie. It's written by his favorite writers. Now, as he's leaving that booth a second time, it goes into a They Live sales pitch. Buy more, buy now. Buy more, buy now. Wow, right? That also lets us know that there's a bit of freedom in the system. That you do get things appointed to you. You do live in a socialistic, communistic world of fascism. It's like every bad version of government's come together to make this world. But you still can choose what you buy, a bit like the, season 1, episode 2 of Black Mirror. But he comes back. And the interesting thing is he threw up. When he threw up the sedation drug. He took it, but he threw it up. And so he comes back home, and it looks like she hasn't been taking her pill at all. And so they finally bond at their house. And they're getting really close to each other, and George does a beautiful job doing this super tight sequence on their faces, really close together. There isn't any real physical chemistry between these two actors at all. At no point do you feel like, oh yeah, they make a good couple. You will never say that in this film. But they have this real intimate conversation, and it's all about, you didn't take the drug, so you like me now. She says to him, and he says, oh, you know, yeah, I like you now. I don't know, you know, I really like you enough that even if I took the other pills, again, I would probably still be loyal to you. It's because it's kind of what he's wanting. He wants that human connection, because you can't you have to use drugs to get rid of the human desires of your genetics, right? So they end up making love, which is not okay. And their entire apartment, everyone's apartments, are all videotaped like Big Brother, the show on TV, right? Now, George does an amazing job directing this and using the technology to obfuscate their actual sexual contact, because he doesn't want this movie to turn into a love story, because it's not going to be one. And when they're done making love, I think I can call it that, it's a brief moment of consciousness that they attain, by which I can say for that pocket of time they make love. She says, you know, they're watching us, right? She says, I know they're watching us. I can feel it. And he naively says, nobody knows what we're doing right now. And immediately it switches to a camera of them, and it looks like a replay of what had just occurred in the room, or at least they're still rolling around. It's blurry. And there's like an unnamed council of people staring. There's two rows of people kind of in a V, and Lucas does this amazing, beautiful job. As part of the re-edit, he took his principal footage and re-edited it so it's not new actors. He pulls the camera really close up everyone's face on one side, and he rolls it around, and then he films the last set of faces and then turns the camera to point at the monitor. They're all watching this, and they look disgusted that they just actually made love. You know, don't knock it till you try it, guys, is all I gotta say. Then it switches, because he has to have something break the scenes apart. I know this as a writer. And it's this odd scene. I don't know if this was originally shot this way, or if he edited it but using new scenes. But a group of people are watching this game that seems to be a bit like tennis, except the sound isn't a tennis ball. It's some sort of zappy noise going back and forth. And so you see the heads go left and then right, and then left, and then right. And he's letting you know more about the environment. There is entertainment, but with their impressionistic, drugged-up brains, they can't get emotional about it. It's not like rollerball where everyone's screaming at the top of their lungs, right? It then cuts to a sequence where one of the cops is having an issue. He's walking down a hallway. He turns before he gets to the end of the corridor, and he walks into the wall, and he walks into the wall, and he's kind of talking to himself. So it shows you the frailty of these robots. They're not perfect. Then it cuts back to their apartment, and they have brought up this CG monk thing. It's like a monk outfit when you can't really see inside the face, and they're kind of talking to it, and it seems like they're almost confessing to it, but it's sort of a program already in session. So then they get into this conversation. They turn that off, and they get into the conversation about what are we going to do from this point forward. You can't stop taking your drugs, but you need to. They figured out a way to kind of hide it. They make it look like they're overdosing and taking too much drugs, but they're actually not taking anything at all. He says, look, tomorrow at work, I got to do a slip movement, and I'm going to need my drug to survive, Intrazine. And without it, he doesn't think he's going to have a steady hand or a steady mind to do it. And she says, you know what? You can do that without the drug. Just try it. You just think you can't. And she says, do you think you're going to tell on me the second that, you go back on sedation? And he's like, you know what? I might have before, but now since we're together and I know what we're about, I don't think I could ever do that to you. I love you, in a way. Now, you know that explosion happens at the beginning of the movie. And for some reason, at that moment, because those people saw them, they're being split apart without his knowledge. So as soon as he leaves his house that day, things start changing. She gets a letter to roommate with somebody else, and they read this letter together before he takes off. And he's like, well, you don't have to do that. This is what he's like, way above me. I've got to do it. And he's like, that's not following the policies. He didn't file it properly. Why, this is, just say no. Just ignore it. Come home to me. But now THX, Duvall's character, gets called to this dude, Sen. S-E-N. His designation is SEN 5241. And this is where you get into Donald Pleasant's character. Fine actor. But he plays a bit of a loony. He's kind of a strange guy. The background on this dude, which will help you when you watch the movie, trust me, is that he's a hacker. Somehow he finds, they never ever show it, but he finds computers and he programs them. He eventually brags about being able to program. The only thing we can assume is that he was definitely part of a team at some younger point in his life where he actually contributed to the code and therefore knows it, but you never see it happen. And he has finagled things such that THX is now being expected to room with Sen. And Sen's next door neighbor and his roommate, O&A, is dead because of that explosion. Destroyed, he said. It's very interesting that George wrote the word destroyed. The reason why that's interesting is that takes away a lot of the emotional connection. They were simply destroyed. That's it. But Sen, I believe, tells THX a lie. And he says, Lua was here just before you. And I talked with her, and it seems like she's completely on board with the fact that, she's going to be pushed off to this other person, and you're going to come live with me. Because she told him, this is Sen talking. It's funny, Sen, S-E-N-S-I-N. That, you guys weren't really connecting that well anyway. Like, you weren't really meant to be roommates anyway. Yeah, it seemed like there was a problem connecting you guys together. Now, we know they've had problems with their relationship, but also THX has gone to this Jesus character twice complaining about it. And they just eavesdropped on the conversation after they, before, during, and after they made love, where they actually admitted to each other, I didn't think we had much of a connection. But now I sense it, and it's there, and we made love. And what's interesting about them making love is that even though the machine came out of the ceiling and he was aware of how to pleasure himself, I think you can ask any young man who crosses that barrier. I don't know about women, but you could see it on TV a lot and still not know what to do when the time comes around. You're just fiddling around, right? Like, oh, well, there it is, And so it's interesting that in the film, it suggests that just nature, runs its course, and you will figure it out because it's your genetics. Of course, it's easy to do, and of course, it's your genetics. But now he goes to work. He goes to work, and he hasn't taken the intrazine drug. Now, what they did with the director's cut and re-editing the mechanical movements, so he's got this big, thick glass in front of him, and he's got those sort of extension arms, which they used to, mix the plutonium. You've seen this as a kid with the Manhattan Project, right? Except these things are going in, and they're really precise little grabber arms. And this was in 71. It was amazing what they did. But there are several little clips that were completely CG'd, and this is one of them that was upgraded brilliantly. He has this little thing. And you've seen it once in the beginning of the montage intro. So you're familiar with the process. But now you understand the slit movement is to pull out this power supply from its container. And with these extension arms and these little, like the little picker-upper thing that picks up your trash, right? He's got to precisely drop this into a cylinder, and he's having a hard time. And they're watching him have a hard time. And so he actually ends up dropping it, and it doesn't go in the hole. It falls over on the side. And this thing is super duper hot in the remake. It's not super hot in the original. It's just toxic. What George does in lieu of having this special effect in 71, he starts compressing the scene with all of the narration. Okay, THX, what's going on here? You're slipping up here. Your heart rate's up, blah, blah, blah. And they're running a whole biometric on him while he's doing this. And he keeps dropping it, and he keeps dropping it. But he's almost there. At one point, this connection network of people watching him at the factory at that particular corridor, not the upper massive authority, but the factory authority, decides to do what's called a mind block because he's dropped this bat. And the second time he dropped it, it actually burned through a giant portion of his workspace. And they just keep showing it, just slowly burning through. But in the original film, when they do the mind block on him, it's a woman way up in the authority of the company. She decides to do it. She just calls it. It's on me, boom. And in the original film, he just freezes, which is really good enough. But in the remake, they actually CG'd his eyes rolling back in his head. And it's like they went back and got some extra footage they had of Duvall, or they might have actually CG'd his entire face. But you really can't tell. I mean, because he doesn't move, they can get all the textures right for a freeze, and his eyes are just boom, 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 boom while they block him. And this little thing just keeps burning through, and it's not a good idea. It's better for him to continue trying than to block him at this point, right? Well, because it keeps escalating and the radiation leakage keeps getting hotter and hotter, and everyone else leaves immediately when this warning goes up, but he's mind blocked. So he's standing at his cubicle thing. It's not really a cubicle, but his station. And someone way up high goes, "Who authorized this mind block? That's the stupidest thing in the world to do. Turn it off." The woman who did it reverses it and then announces over the radio that it wasn't her, and everything's back to okay. So she just lies and covers her ass. And he ends up picking it back up and putting it in the hole all by himself without the drug. Now he is screwed up. And in this world, you can't screw up like that. So he's immediately arrested because they do a drug test on him, and he hasn't taken the drug, intrazine. He isn't fully sedated. So cops just, walking him down the corridor. And the commonality of the cops is that they will always lie to you. And brace for this one, man. Brace for this one. AI will always say, "My job is to help you. I'm here to protect you." And then he flashes forward, and Duvall has got blood all running down his back. But he's not complaining. He just took it. In this world, if you were whipped 39 times, you just take it. You wouldn't think that you have any sovereign right not to be whipped. And so he gets processed in court. The state pushes for him to be basically destroyed. And he has this attorney. This is a very fast sequence, and this is very astute on Lucas's behalf. If you really, and who knows how much Murch put into this, the dialogue that's going back and forth between the state and this attorney and the judge, and Duvall's just not saying a word. That's just, you don't say a word. But it is the most abbreviated technical legalese you've ever heard. It's not real legalese. It's a very strange chain of logic by which he is deemed unrehabilitatable, and he's going to be put away into this other facility for reconditioning, basically. But it's not that clear. I think it's almost frustrating to listen to the dialogue, but at the same time, if you really take a step back from really trying to understand it, which Lucas doesn't want you to understand it, he wants you to know that when you go 100, 150 years in the future, you won't recognize the language up there. I mean, yes, it's English, but the tense and the definition of these words are totally different. But they immediately also throw into court the fact that they have this video of them making love back at their place. And so the prosecution calls Duvall and his wife erotics. We've got to get rid of this perversion, these erotics. It's all religious based. I mean, in this world, you couldn't tell the story of Adam and Eve. It just wouldn't be allowed. That very act is not allowed. So Duvall is deemed incurable, and then he is going to be held in detention. And he's suddenly in this white room, and this is one of the most famous clips of the film. He's in this white room, and in that white thing, he's lying down, and these three cops come in slowly with their really long cow prods, and they're just pure black. The cinematography is fantastic. The design is fantastic. The composition is fantastic. And they start talking, this talk between the robots, calling out these numbers which represent regions on his body, and they're zapping various regions on his body. It's almost like it's like performance art shock treatment. And so they are giving him shock treatment, and they're calling it out, and they're studying his body, and they're studying his reactions. We'll do the 54 now. Okay, now just avoid the 11554. Okay, now hit him with the 69 and da-da-da. I mean, seriously, it's crazy. And he's just taking these little shocks. It doesn't seem, he's not screaming or anything, if I remember right. But that's the setup before he goes to this clinic, and he has this machine work on his body. Another famous shot from the film is Duvall laying down on his bed, and there's these little suction cups on his head with wires coming out. We use that in the MK Ultra radio program promo. This machine is off camera, and so all you see are these different things coming up, and they inject him into his arm with something, and it's got this little swell on his arm. They end up pushing on his chin with this little rod, which opens up his mouth. In one case, they drop a pill. In another case, they put a tube in there, and they're filling him up. Another tube goes down his nose, and they're making him drink something down the back of his throat. These other suction cups come down on his eyeballs, and they're doing something to his eyes, like rinsing it in some sort of medicine because your eyes are very absorbent. I mean, it is meticulous. And they even have, at the last sequence, they have these little tubes that are split like a Y, and they're drying off his excess moisture off his eyes after those other things come off. I mean, it's 1971, which means it was made between 69 and 70 from a kid in his 20s. I dare you to find an adult that watches THX 1138 and just goes, oh yeah, of course. Of course that's happening. And this is where we get the top tier. I think we have at least 3 tiers of humans in this film that are exposed through the script. One is Duvall's THX 1138 character. The next one up is the woman who mind blocked him. And this third layer up is people just like us. And Duvall's in this room that's all white. He's in white. And they have these kind of heads-up display images. And there's these 2 scientists talking to each other like doctors. And they're like, well, what's up with the drug? You know, how's that machine work again? Oh, how do I get this display to work right? And they're just having this kind of side conversation. The dialogue written is phenomenal for a film of this kind, and its acting is equally phenomenal. These actors seem like they were having the most free-flowing conversation about technical nonsense as if it was real. They played it straight, which made the movie great. Any movie that's like this, that's played straight by the actors, where no one's overacting, you know. There's a little bit of overacting in Logan's Run, right? Rollerball played it straight. Tron played it straight. That's why these films became cult classics above other cult classics, right? But what they are doing to his body is fascinating, especially with today's nanotechnology that might be the result of humans ingesting all kinds of plastics, all kinds of metals, and building nanosystems inside your body. It's being pulled out of people that claim to be having Morgellons disease. But Judy Wood has done microscopic traces of what's coming out of these people's bodies, and their nanosystems. They're patented rainbow dyes that are actually patented that signify various mechanisms, and they create these tubules and these junctions, and they're all, go see my episodes on Morgellons to see all the photos of this stuff. It'll blow your mind, man. Including ABC taking a family into a clinic and having a doctor look at these little tubules growing out of this kid's lesion that was on both sides of his lips, and the camera crew, you know, surprises the clinic and just walks in and says, "Look at that right there." And you'll see this woman go down with some sort of magnifying device, and then she turns and looks at the camera with just like, she looks like a sheet of white. So they're hitting him with some sort of frequency, and he starts changing positions, and he starts like rolling around, like he gets stuck in a position. At one point, he starts to convulse like he's having a stroke. And these guys are just casually talking, "Oh, well, yeah, don't do that one too much. Okay, yeah, what about this one? Yeah, hit him with the da-da-da-da." And he's changing his body, he's moving around. Like they have completely, as a result of all that injection and all that fluid exchange, they have put mechanisms in his body to utterly control his physical position, absolute. Like he's a little break dancer. When you see it, you'll understand. Now, in a bizarre twist of events, after all that happens, he's lying down in that room and they've stopped torturing him. And Lou comes in and runs to him. And they embrace. And they're still connected. Even though he just got all those drugs, it's not stopping his connection with her. And they roll around again, and they get out of their clothes, and they roll around again. And she tells him, "Look, man, I'm pregnant." And what's interesting about being pregnant in this particular world, as we will discover, that doesn't happen. Taking a woman out of the workforce is a loss of productivity. It doesn't happen. And so they get a little moment to roll around, and then the cops come again. 2 cops come in with the prods. But there's also, for the very first time, the color yellow in the movie. If you look in the credits, it'll say "guy in yellow." And it's this other doctor. They never explain who he is. He never says a word. And the cops are trying to separate the 2 of them. And what's strange about this scene is that obviously Lucas wanted to let us know that she was pregnant, and they had to see each other again. But there's no explanation why in this tyrannical world of whatever, that they would be allowed to ever connect one more time. It's kind of a nonsensical scene that's important. But Duvall attempts to fight them off, but he doesn't have any knowledge of how to fight. And so he's just grabbing one of the prods, and eventually the second one lines up very slowly and nails him. And he goes limp, like he's tased. He stays out of consciousness. And the cop picks him. He's naked as a jaybird. And they do very Austin Powers, perfect obfuscation of any private parts that would get him a bad rating. And they carry him off. Now, this is where, when I first watched the movie, this stuck with me because it didn't make any sense to me. And it may still not make any sense to me exactly. He is dropped off after that scene. He's dressed back up again. He's dropped off at this area that's in a big white room. This room is infinite. You don't see any walls or anything. And there's these little sort of cabinet sofas spread out, probably about, 10 of them. And there's people there. And Sin is there. And Sin got turned in eventually, earlier in the film, by THX. He told him, "I'm going to report you, man. You're trying to push me into you being your roommate, and I'm going to report you." So before he went to work to do that slip move, there are these complaint boxes on the wall for violations. And he writes down, "Sin 5412 or whatever it is, or 5214 is messing with me and whatever. So he got in trouble, and that's why they're in this area together. Now, in this area, there are seemingly mentally ill people in this area, and it's kind of a disturbing scene on many levels. So Sin is just a chatterbox of lunacy. I mean, the guy's just talking through his ass about what he thinks his position in this crazy world is. He obviously thinks he's more important than he is. He says he's got a plan to get them together, then maybe a plan to escape. And this older gentleman, who's the old Twilight Zone guy, he starts talking. He seems extremely lucid and very deep. And he eventually reveals in his conversation he's been here for a long time. And it's funny because I just watched The Twilight Zone last night, where they're stuck in this cylinder. These 5 characters are stuck in a cylinder. They don't know who they are, and they don't know why they're there. And it's just blank. It's just in this cylinder, and they don't have any props. They don't get hungry. They don't get thirsty. And so it was very reminiscent of that sort of mechanic, which would have happened only 6 years earlier. But there are definitely some folks in the room who either, if the actors are pretending to be mentally ill, wow, did they nail this? They may have actually brought in some folks that really had issues. In one scene, they bring in this little person, and he kind of looks like a little John Belushi, and he looks feral. And they call them shell dwellers. And they're these little people that live on the outskirts of the legal zone. This is sort of like the Cubs, which were written in Logan's Run. Except they're not just youthful people in yellow. They are actually feral beings that aren't in the system. And apparently the dialogue matures to the point where we learn that they smell bad. And the guy doesn't speak. He just kind of grunts a little bit. And he ends up kind of powwowing with one of the gigantic, this big guy who doesn't look like he's home, right? But one of the scenes that makes this disturbing is there's a woman in the scene. There's only one woman character in this world. And this sort of deviant guy. And he takes the woman, and they're talking and talking and talking. Everyone's talking to each other and having these weird, bizarre, mentally ill, philosophical conversations. And you see this guy take the girl and lay her down on the other side of the table so you can't see what he's doing. But you know he's going to try to rape her. This is 71, man. And so you don't see anything, and he's kind of coming, close to her, and he's leaning down. Of course, he's going off camera behind this table. It doesn't go more than maybe 30 seconds before she screams, and the actress playing this character really plays like a mentally ill person who doesn't really have any physical knowledge about how to push anyone away. She simply screams, and she doesn't have any top on, but they don't show it. But she's climbing away, and it's like, whoa, he just tried it. He got blocked by her screaming. And now the cop comes in. A cop comes in to talk to that guy. And the dude pushes the cop down who tried to rape the girl. And he just starts stomping the face of this cop, showing that if you did just decide to push a cop, you could actually defend yourself against these guys. But because they're so sedated and they're so intrazined and they're so Prussianistically raised, they don't have the conception that they can fight back. It's so important to understand that, because that's what we'll be if we don't stop this kind of thing from evolving slowly over time. Boiling the frog, right? But Duvall gets tired of listening to all this crap, and so he just starts walking. And they've been passing out these things that look like bars of soap. They're little like gray blocks, and those are your food. And Sin just keeps trying to accumulate these off everybody, and everyone else is kind of mentally ill, so they don't realize he's stolen a bunch of these things, and so Duvall just starts walking. Duvall hasn't said a word the whole time because he just what is he going to contribute? He doesn't want to have a conversation with Sin. He definitely can't have a conversation with everyone else, so he just starts walking and walking and walking. And this room is just infinite, which is where it gets kind of weird. Why would they build this room? I mean, this room would have to be 50 football fields to have this level of like you can't see anything for miles, right? And the other thing is there's no pillars. That's another interesting. I'm sure Lucas didn't mean to do this, but if you don't have any pillars and you've got a ceiling for miles, then you have a structural advancement that doesn't exist in the world today, right? A cave can do it because the mountain will hold itself up, but even that has its limitations. So Sin starts following him, and Sin has got this whole bundle of these little bars in his shirt, and he's just blah, 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 talking, oh, we're going to escape. I get it. And so finally, Duvall just keeps walking and walking and walking. And eventually, Duvall talks to the Sin, because Sin says, oh, I know there's an exit over here. And he says, you're lying. No, I know, it's right over here. And shortly after that, they look in the distance. And this is where you get the Don Pedro character, who was also in Planet of the Apes, episode 2 of the movie. Great actor. He's way in the distance. This guy must be 6'6" or something. Now, Duvall's not a tall guy, but this dude's big. And he's way in the distance, and he's waving to them, and they're waving back to him, And so finally he just starts jogging up to him, and he's a really odd-shaped character because he's so tall. And he's like, hey, man, what's going on? And he's like totally chill, amazing guy. And he's like, hey, mind if I have some of this food because I'm starving? And he starts just gnawing on these bars. And so they're like, he says, well, you want to get out of here because I know where the door is. And, Sin just said that he knew where the door was, but he was lying. And so Duvall goes, you know where the door is? And he goes, yeah, it's right over here. And they just jog just a few feet over, and sure enough, there's a wall with this little dot on it towards the floor, and it opens up a door. And I tell you what, there was I don't know, I'm just going to go into one little digression, a personal digression, because I thought I had seen a Twilight Zone there's a Twilight Zone where a girl is the daughter of these two older people, and they're just in this beautiful mansion, and there's this other maid giving the mother a massage, and the girl's like restless, like, God, is this all we do? Is this, you just get a massage all freaking day? Like, what the hell kind of life are we living here? And it turns out that in the Twilight Zone that everyone's a robot except these two old people, including the daughter. But I swore for years that I had seen that. And if you guys know if this is another story in another franchise, please tell me, because it's been driving me nuts. But I have this memory of the father not only saying, hey, look, you live better than everybody else. But he opens, the way I remember the scene, I've seen the movie or seen the episode 100 times now, and it's not in there. There's a door that they open up, and there's 1 million people outside walking back and forth in these corridors, and the father proves to the daughter, look at how they live. Look at all the luxury we have. And he closes the door and he goes, now aren't you happy you live here? You understand the benefits you have by being with us, right? It's not in there. I don't know where that came from. But in this moment, the second they open this door, there's the corridor with all of these people rushing back and forth. And we're talking about people compressed like Mardi Gras. And they're just moving like crazy. And there's this overhead speaker saying, keep the walkways clean. You're looking at this going, really? And so they immediately get swept away in this kind of river of people. And that's when Duvall is like, okay, we got to get the hell out of here. And Sin, being an older man, gets caught up in the river of people. And he's trying to get back to them. Just a split second, he lost him, like being in a river and getting caught in a current. And this dude and Duvall's THX character, they push in this door and they end up getting out of that mess, right? Now, immediately, when they get to safety, they see a screen, and it basically announces that THX and Sin are both felons now, and they're being chased. It's being announced on sort of that second-tier level where authority is enforced, right? But now this is brilliant, and I forgot about this, and it has been used 2 times in other sci-fi series on television, but this is one of the very first ones I've ever seen, because THX turns to this dude, this Don Pedro guy, and he looks like Cuban black is what he looks like to me. But he says, who are you, man? Like, who are you? Because the other thing is that if you pay attention, it's only THX and Sin on the TV as being escaped felons. Where's the other guy's name? You know? And the dude's just, they're in this laboratory and it's got full of blue jars everywhere and there's babies in these blue jars. And it's not said whether or not those babies are growing or whether those babies are experiments they're already gone, right? So the dude's just, he's so casual, man. He looks through the stuff on the shelf and he goes, I'm a hologram. I'm a hologram. And he says it was a byproduct of electronically created realities. How insightful, man. Again, 1971, the pixel on a screen was invented in 1968 by Ivan Sutherland. And we're talking 3 years later, and he's already got VR figured out. Lucas does. The guy's no chump, you know. Meanwhile, Sin is getting on a subway. He's writing some pretty cool news sequences in the director's cut. He gets off the subway. He realizes he can't go anywhere. He needs to not be seen. He's a felon. So he starts crawling down the tube of the subway, trying to get to the next station, kind of throwing them off, right? He sees, I think, a shell dweller, and he runs from it. But now they introduce a new subplot to the finale of this movie that's going to run until the end of the film, which is that because this is a socialistic world of complete government control, they go to this sort of computer room, which for 1971 was extremely modern, but it's one of those big giant rooms with all the reel-to-reels. But the way they kind of painted the computers, it sort of hid the complexity of how the computers are actually working so that it would age better. It was really done extremely well, other than reel-to-reels, which obviously died out by at least 1990 or so. Some long-term storage was still reel-to-reel, even in the 90s. They just weren't where you were seeing. Of course, they just made the tape container different. But they end up getting in this communication center, and what it is in real life is a room with all the relays for mass telephone communication. So it's just millions of these little relays all over the wall. It's actually gorgeous to see this. It's the comparable thing today is to see the big computer arrays for Google or something like that, right? As I understand those rooms, they're actually deafeningly loud when they're on because they are flickering. Every one of those relays is popping. But of course, in this futuristic world, they've cut the sound out and they're audio dubbing it in. So you have this holographic character who never, as far as I know, I couldn't discern a name for him ever. And THX, and they're just slowly moving around. Well, then some cops come in there, a couple of them, and they're trying to track him down. So they're kind of hiding, moving back and forth. Traditional old scene in a warehouse looking thing, except it's very computerized. And this is where the film starts taking artistic liberty. They eventually escape those cops, and they end up in this warehouse with tons of bodies underneath tarps. And THX, Duvall's character, is just kind of being quiet. It's what he does in the film. He's just looking around. And the holograph character is, I forgot to mention, you have the hologram that shows up, the brilliant gentleman who was the Johnny Cab in Total Recall. I did the voice for that. But he ends up being the doctor in Star Trek Voyager. But for those of you who don't know, the British show Red Dwarf, with my buddy Robert Llewellyn as Crichton, there's obviously Rimmer, who is got the big H on his forehead, and that's one that Doug Naylor put together, which is very funny. And if you haven't seen Red Dwarf, you got to just tune in if you're a sci-fi person. It's a little rough to get into at first because the accents are so thick in some areas, but man, it will grow on you, and you'll want to see every single episode. And they're still filming them to this day, although I think Robert's out now. And mainly because his makeup takes about 2 hours to put on every day. It's pretty crazy. So anyway, back to the warehouse. The hologram character is pulling the tarps off, looking at the bodies, and he says, "Hey, man, there's no organs in any of these bodies." Now, what's interesting about that is they don't really explain why that's the case. But we've had movies after movies now where we're talking about, and science and people on the internet claiming that they can at least clone your body, and maybe there's all kinds of rumors about installing consciousness in bodies and stuff. It's like, man, I've been writing about that exact thing with a gentleman that pioneered that Hollywood story for the last 15 years. And we sat and talked to some of the most brilliant people in the world that want to tell you all kinds of stories because they like to know famous people, and ain't nobody said they can put consciousness in a computer and then back into a human being. By the way, Steven Lisberger is about to come out with a book called Topeka. So keep your eyes open for that. It'll be a few more months, but I just did the book cover for it, and then he did another book cover for it. So I think his painting is going to be the final book cover. So I've been writing about this for a long time. Our film got stolen and turned into Transcendence with Johnny Depp. Anywho, organ harvesting. It's they don't say it, but it's there. I don't know if in weird circles Lucas heard something and decided to put it in there, but for some reason he specifically says there's no organs in these bodies, but never explains it in the movie. As far as if I missed something, let me know. But here comes this woman that's going to tag the bodies. And this is another famous little scene. It became the movie poster in the 21st century where she's going to literally put a tag on the earlobe of everyone who's dead. And the hologram, he lies down and pretends to be dead. And so does THX. And so she comes up to a couple of dead bodies, pops the ears. We're not really seeing what's happening. And then finally we see it happen on the hologram guy. And of course, he doesn't budge because he's a hologram. They never explain hard light and all that stuff that Red Dwarf had to explain and Voyager had to explain. By the way, Red Dwarf preceded Voyager by at least, 1990 they introduced the, first in 1988 they introduced the hologram character. So whenever Voyager started, just do your math. Both characters were amazing. So they get over to Duvall's character and they pop his ear and he was like, oh my God. He jumps up. He's like, oh man, that fucking hurts, man. And he starts running. And of course, these aren't security people. So they're just like, whoa, this is weird. One of these dudes is alive, So we switch back to Sin to, keep the continuity a little renewed here. And he ends up stumbling inside of a video studio with the big Eastern Orthodox Christ character there. And I don't know what they're really saying. It looks like it's got, the cameras and like studio cameras for for the news or any show you might see on TV. And it's got a big plug box down in front of this thing, big power junction. And he mistakenly thinks it's an altar, so he gets down on his knees and starts praying to this Christ character. And then this monk dude comes in, who's the monk character that actually got projected into their living room, and it still barely shows the dude's face at all. And he's like, oh, this isn't a place for worship. By the way, who are you and what are you doing here? And he says, oh, I'm sorry, I'll leave. And he goes, well, first you need to let me know who you are. Yeah, I'll just leave. And he goes, no, you're in violation. I have to report every intruder. Where's your badge? And they took his badge, Sin's badge, when he went to the funny farm area, right? So in a weird little sequence, Sin just pushes the old man and he falls down like he's dead or something. That was the only thing in the movie that was kind of like, really? At least sock him in the face, something. He's an old guy. He'll be alive. He just will be knocked out. But it was this very gentle push down moment. So we go back to our other two characters running from this ear popping thing. And they end up going into a room. And it's a editing room of a television show. So, all little monitors on the screen and the control board and the fader. And they're not making it that in this movie. It's kind of funny. I think up until like 71, there weren't a lot of backstage filming in those rooms, but with, all the stuff that happened in the later 70s and 80s, that was always the thing they cut to show the fading. I think there's one show on TV that always started in that room, and it was a big deal that the fade went on and then the show started or whatever. I can't remember what that show was. Maybe you do. But he uses a terminal and he finds Lou. In terms of where she's supposed to be. She's supposed to be in reproduction unit 34. And he says she's not there, though. They never really explain how he knew that she wasn't there. But I forgot to completely explain this other subplot. I apologize. they start tracking how much money it's costing them to grab THX and Sin. And the system has calculated that they allowed 16,000 credits. That's it. That's the total budget to chase these two. The first time they report it, they're only up to $1,000. But as they keep running and keep running, it keeps going up and up and up in costs. By the time he's at that editing room looking at Blue, they're up to $6,000. Meaning how much resources they've spent to chase these guys. I thought that was pretty cool. Flip back to Sin. He's in the subway. He's kind of given up. I mean, he has nothing to lose. He's not going to get killed. He's sitting on a big marble bench. He's watching these little boys play this little game. And eventually one little boy runs up to him and he goes, "Hey, my little thing came off." And it's this crazy double syringe thing that goes into their arm. And on the syringe plungers, which are the big kind, it has an educational title on it. All right, wasn't able to read it. And he's like, "Oh, well, let me help you with that." And he kind of gets it wrong for a split second. And he goes, no. "Oh, yeah, I see." And he puts it on. He goes, "When I was a kid," he goes, "we used to have to stay in bed all day." And he goes, "I had to learn this," I forgot what topic he mentioned, because we had this big tank of my class. And he goes, "It took a whole week to get the class into us. So we had to be in bed the whole time." And the kids look at him and go, "Really? You couldn't play?" This is an advancement in education. It's sort of like the Matrix, that they can get this fluid that gives them an education. Never explained. What could that possibly be? Well, I don't know. An electrical liquid that goes into your brain and actually configures the knowledge into your brain. But now we're heading into the final stretch. Sin is picked up by 2 cops at that marble bench, and he doesn't resist. He just goes with them. No big deal. THX and the hologram dude, they're running into the garage. And this is where a lot of editing happened. But I'll tell you what, the stuff that's really in the first film in 71, which was not edited, is breathtaking cinematography with what's about to occur. Now, they've been showing you this car off and on. They ran that little commercial, that little skit, in their apartment, so you'd see this crazy car. And they go into this garage, and it's a real car. I've read one article about it. I don't know if they added more body work to it, but there's a row of them. And so Duvall's climbing into one, and it's really compact. And Duvall's a small guy, so he climbs into this thing. It's got the wing doors, and this big Don Pedro character playing the hologram, he's in a different one. He's in a darker blue one. And he is really having a hard time getting in this thing. It's kind of funny. And so Duvall knows what to do. He starts starting up the car, and he's pushing all the right buttons, looking around. He has both of them have to put a headset on when they're inside their individual cars. And they're showing the 2 cops walking because they're keeping their budget low, right? So Duvall starts up his car. And hologram guy, he's not a real guy, so he's never been in a car. He doesn't know what to do, and he's just trying to figure out what the hell to do, and the cops are closing. So Duvall takes off, and he gets down this garage, and it's all been edited in CG now. They kept the original footage, but they rotoscoped out the backgrounds and put futuristic city scenes in the background. The factory's been upgraded a lot too at the beginning of the film. But he goes down, he makes a turn, and he stops his car, and he's looking in the rearview mirror, and he's waiting for Hollow to follow him, right? He's not coming, and that dude cannot figure out how to start his car. And so finally he's like, "Man, I gotta go. Sorry, dude." Boom, he takes off in this car. So the 2 cops get into the garage. They're about to get on top of this other guy, trying to get his car. And finally he hits the start button. And this thing goes up, and they play the sound effects. Think about this, THX, right? So you have the whole Star Wars library of sounds. They basically play a really high-pitched jet sound, like a fighter jet sound. I mean, it kind of sounds like a commercial engine as well. Probably like 3 or 4 sounds mixed together. But as soon as they get to his car and they're about to yank him out of the car, he doesn't know what to do. He just hits the gas, and there's this amazing shot where this car just drives about 20 feet and slams into a pillar and kills the hologram guy. But they destroy this car on film. I mean, it's some money getting destroyed there. I don't know. There's probably a story behind that car getting, where they found that car to destroy it, or maybe they built a prop to do it. It looks legit, though. But now Duvall is hauling ass through all of these highways, and they're doing every tunnel in LA, every tunnel around the world. I don't know which tunnel. It looks like, kind of looks like the Blade Runner tunnel, but which I think is Figueroa downtown. But there's a few different tunnels in LA that could qualify for this. There's a tunnel that goes into Pasadena off the 110. But it doesn't really look like those tunnels. It looks more European. But this car is hauling butt, and it's like this jet car. Of course, they're playing a little bit faster, and it's been CG'd a little bit here and there, but not much. They kept most of the original scenes. And now the two bike cops have gotten on to these cool, crazy motorcycles. And they're like these futuristic crotch rockets. And they also have a minor sort of jet sound to them. So he's hauling butt in this car. And eventually he switched to the dashboard, and this temperature gauge starts screaming up to this overheating index, right? And he's just ignoring it because what can he do? He's got to go. And they start now updating the budget on this grab. The total allocation to catch him is $14,000. Now they cross 10,000, and they're not supposed to spend more than 5% of the 14 to capture anybody. Whatever the budget is, you're only supposed to spend 5% if you want to get a bonus. And now they're at $10,000 of 14. He's got to lose these two cops. He manages to do it in two different maneuvers. One, he accidentally goes so quick that he overheats the car. And so the car finally just shuts the engine down, and eventually it stops. And they're showing this top-down sort of alien, showing the two bikes, and they keep announcing how far away they are from the car. And he's just waiting. He's just waiting for the car to turn back on, and the tension is really beautiful. And finally, he punches it again, and he hauls ass. And now he's trying to get control of the car, and he finally gets control, and he ends up driving, and he starts hitting these sort of those little cones that sit in the mediums, right? But these things start shattering into these little cubes, which makes one of the bikers hit the cubes, and he falls over. And apparently he can't get back up. So the one bike is still chasing him. The car gets up to 235 miles an hour. The car is called a Samos 3, Samos 3. Obviously, probably a fake name. While he's going 235 miles an hour, the budget has now exceeded $14,000. The last cop gets nailed because there's some construction on the highway. That's what the barrier was all about. This whole area is restricted. And so he ends up, of course, going 235 miles an hour. He sees scaffolding across the highway, which is a tunnel, right? And so he manages to slow down just enough, and he slides sideways, and he punches through. The guys in the scaffolding are okay. But now the cop hits the scaffolding. He wrecks his bike. The car is gone. The car is done. It's also overheated a second time. And so Duvall starts running. And now he's in this weird restricted area. Logan's Run, the Cubs, the cathedral, right? So he's running, and there's these feral beasts in there, right? There's little people, and then there's these monkey characters. And a bunch of new monkey characters were actually CG'd into the movie, but the original actually has a furry character jump on Duvall's back. But what Lucas did was, and this is kind of cheesy, it's the only part that's kind of like, there's more of them, right? It's like Moonwatcher from 2001, but there's like half a dozen of them. He ends up killing one of them, and that freaks them all out, and he runs. So the final sequence has to do with the budget. There's two new cops on foot running after him. They see the feral beast as well, and they punch through that. And he's being chased. And he finally gets to the end of this tunnel, and there's a giant tunnel straight up, big column straight up with the staircases all the way up on several of them. And Duvall starts climbing up the staircases because it's open up above. And these cops are telling their little AI lies. Here, we're only here to help you. Everything will be just fine. Just come down, And he just, he's not saying anything. He just keeps climbing up. Duvall's character, THX 113, doesn't say much. And he's just climbing up. And eventually, these cops are kind of gaining on him a little bit, not much. But then this supreme command comes down. from probably that third tier and says, look, you've exceeded your budget by over 3,600 credits. Terminate the pursuit. They don't flinch. They immediately call off the pursuit. And these two cops get it in their heads, call off the pursuit. And so what's really fascinating about this little scene is that the cops look up at him and they know they can't chase him anymore. And so they try to talk him down. Okay, man, we have to go back. This is your last chance. You can't survive outside of the city shell. You can't. And so they start climbing down, and he keeps climbing up. And there's this scene, which has been a little bit CG'd to make it look a little bit better, but it's very tactfully done, very tastefully done. And it shows Duvall climbing up the stairs, and you can see the opening of this tunnel. It's beautiful sky up there. It's very thermal, sunset-y colors. And he gets up over that edge, and Lou's back there. I saved a few things for you, by the way. She's not with him. It's not like Logan's Run, which wasn't the end of the film by any means when they saw the sun. But he crawls up, and he stands up, and it's this gigantic sun. And the original 71 shot is a pretty big-ass sun. Looks pretty amazing, but they rotoscoped everything out and put in a better, huge sun that's starting to set. And it's just Duvall's character just staring, and it basically freezes and starts rolling credits. And that's the end of the movie. Again, it's a very atypical film. Let me just tell you, man. Now, what's interesting about that last scene, if you really think it through, the sun is setting. I live on the beach area, in the beach area. I don't live on the beach, but I see the sunset quite often around here because I like to walk the beach right around that time. The sun sets fast. I've never seen the sun as big as this shot. But he sees the sun for the very first time and feels its obviously healing rays on his body. Something we used to understand before we start putting sunblock on, right? But it's setting, which means he probably has maybe 15 minutes to see the sun if he's lucky, and it's going to stay bright for maybe another 30 minutes or so, and then he's going to be in the dark up there by himself for the very first time, not knowing anything about where he is. And we have no knowledge of what it's like up there. He doesn't have enough knowledge to fight back against a robot. And now he's going to be out there. And it's supposed to be this happy story. It's definitely a traditional comedy in that the protagonist defeats, he reaches his goal, unlike Tron Legacy, where it's a tragedy, right? He doesn't get his father out of the grid, right? So his destiny on the other side is one of liberation and one of victory, but he doesn't have any books. He doesn't know anything about it. Now, if Charlton Heston's character was able to get out of New York City, having seen a preview of it at the going home sequence with Edward G. Robinson, he's a tough guy. He knows how to shoot a gun. He knows how to do various resourceful things in a world that doesn't have many resources. So he might be able to survive in the wilderness. Probably not, but he'd have to run into some old society things. And hopefully Duvall's character would run into old cities. But would it have edible food? Probably not. It's a very interesting story. This is not a movie you can casually watch. I'll warn you about that right now. You cannot casually watch THX 1138. This is a sit down, get away from anyone who's going to be interrupting you, focus on it, and you can watch it in twice. One, just to get familiar with the story. Now, if you're watching me and you go see it, and you haven't seen it before, or you haven't seen it many years, you're going to go to the next level right away. Especially if you're familiar with a lot of the concerns that we have about where the world might be going. The interesting irony with George Lucas is that he lived in San Rafael and made his company ILM, and Lucasfilms live in these warehouses just across the Golden Gate Bridge outside of San Francisco and not in Hollywood, okay? Because he didn't like Hollywood. He saw what Hollywood was all about. Now, what I personally know is whether or not with his first two films, THX 1138 and American Graffiti, as to whether or not he was living in the Hollywood area at that time. I know some of you know that. Maybe you can put it in the comments for me. I know by the time Star Wars came around, 1974, 73, he was bringing that together. He was definitely up in his laboratories up north. You know, we wonder how some of these directors, one, get discovered at all, but two, get a hold of scripts like this. This is George's brainstorm as proven that it was a student film in college. I don't think anybody like Walter Murch came up to him, "Oh, kid, I hear you're writing a movie. Let me help you out." No, I don't think that happened, right? Maybe you know different. He fantasized something deep. And I think, in my own experience, I know that the more that you write, even just poetry or song lyrics, you will get heavy stories, man, that you have no knowledge of personally. There's no empirical experience in your world that gave you that, oh, remember that time when I was a kid? And this, no, these are stories that absolutely did not exist, and you will sit there and channel some other consciousness into a poem, into a lyric. It happens all the time. I mean, look at the song Wayward Son by Kansas. I mean, that's some deep-ass lyrics. Look at Jimi Hendrix, you know, standing next to a mountain, chopping down with the edge of my hand, you know, because I'm a voodoo child, baby. You know, it's like, holy shit, these people achieve these levels of sort of capturing the essence of storytelling out of the universe. So George had that connection at one point in his life and put down THX 1138. The fact that he homaged himself several times in his own movies is really cool. You know, the prison cell and where Princess Leia was being kept was in cell block THX 1138 or 1138. You know, it's kind of neat. So when you're watching THX 1138, you're watching a film of a dude who channeled some seriously deep stuff. With Alex Huxley, his brother was part of secret societies and came to him and said, by the way, this is how we're going to run the world. Do you want to write a fictional book about it? Or here's all the crap. You can just read it and come up with something. That explains where he came up with Brave New World. What's George got, you know? And it wasn't on point. Like, Brave New World was fairly in your face. George Orwell's 1984 is in your face. One guy, Orwell, is trying to prevent it from happening, and Huxley's like, yeah, totally, man. It's going to happen, dude. So George isn't like either one of those guys on point. He's inferring a lot of things in his film. So either this film happens totally organically, which is what I think, or maybe there was more influence on it. I haven't watched all the way through the student film to see how much of the script evolved from just some wild, weird world into what actually became the film. But the film is handling every aspect of human living in a world where everyone is controlled. And everyone has been controlled since their birth to the point where they can't conceive of things. But there's nothing on point, right? It could have been with those little Greek theater voices I was telling you about, where you get the third level of consciousness when they're zapping his body and making him contort on the ground. They could have brought those characters, he could have brought those characters in several times to narrate something like, you know, when he didn't know how to fight back from being tortured. They could have shown him being beat up to the point he got the bloody back and said, look at this idiot. He doesn't even know how to fight back, you know. Well, that's the way we like him, you know. Ha ha ha, hee hee, high five, ting. He doesn't do anything like that. He leaves it for you to figure it out. So George is a very interesting person when you get to this realm, when you get to seeing the multiple dimensions. When you look at John Carpenter's They Live, you watch They Live and it's entertaining at first. Then you watch it again, you look at where we are today and you're like, whoa. Then you get into like David Icke stuff and you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. You know, at some point you have to ask yourself, where did Carpenter get the notion for They Live? I did a whole episode on that as well. Not quite as exhaustive as the ones I've been doing today. I am going to cover a few more films, by the way, because there are a few more out there. I'll let it be a surprise to you guys, because some of them you're aware of. And again, some of these films, because I'm looking back on these episodes, I'm thinking, is this really of value to see me just meticulously go through a film? And I think it is, because it's sort of like when you watch football I don't know why this happens. You'll watch a football game, and then they go into the post-football game review as if you weren't there to watch this super complex sport called football, right? And they cover every play in this replay, and then the thing starts repeating and repeating on TV. It's like they film about 20 minutes of original content that goes into a loop, and they don't even say it goes into a loop. You're just watching the same thing again, like 20 minutes later, and it'll play for 2 hours. It's just the most bizarre thing. Like it's completely mindless Coliseum brainwashing. But in these particular situations, again, some of these movies are so classic that you've probably already seen them if you like what I put out as a content creator. And so this lets us kind of have that cigar talk about the film at exhaustive levels where you want to go back and see it. And again, I think what's going to happen is if you take my content and you rewatch the film or watch it for the first time, one, you're going to adapt to the film's storyline way faster than what happens to me. I just saw Creator. I've seen it twice now, which I think Creator is going to get, it'd probably get panned, but honestly, it deserves an Oscar for at least a nomination for sound design and production design, if nothing else. It's like Moebius and Sid Mead coming back to us from the dead and saying, here, we got a movie together again. They made Tron together. But this film is, you want to see it in the theater with massive sound, but it's probably too late to do that by now. I saw it in a little boutique theater, which had the most incredible sound. It was amazing. And then I went back last night and I paid $50 for tickets, and it was the worst soundtrack ever. It was like half the sound that these engineers put in there. You couldn't even hear it. It's horrible. So, but when I watched Creator at first, the first 10 minutes are a little slow, and you're kind of like, yeah, what's going on? And you get to the point where you're uninterested because they're not popping it really fast, and you don't know what to expect. But it's basically a Japanese animation script turned into live action. It's one of the finest live action conversions of a Jap anime movie. So if you're into Evangelion, Ghost in the Shell, Akira, you got to see Creator, because it will just, you'll just see traditional scenes you've seen animated for years in live action, and the CG of the robots integrated with the live action scenes is where I think there's another, I don't know exactly what special effects nomination they could get, but they deserve one for that, because it is ridiculous. And it's Denzel Washington's son that plays the lead character, which I didn't know until after I watched it the first time. It looks like Denzel Washington had sex with Lennox Lewis and Lenny Kravitz to make his son. It's like, this kid's just full of like all these crazy genetics. It's endearing. It's a good movie. What these movies offer us, in my opinion, is a glimpse of what could be. And I think that's really important, because we're so busy in our telephones getting these, these now minds instead of linear minds. And so we're incapable of managing the logistics of natural everyday life, because the phone's got us only worried about the next pawn move on the chessboard, as I keep going over with you guys. And so when you hear about a 15-minute city with no cars, you don't drive cars anymore. You walk everywhere you go. You're only allowed to leave your little was a Hunger Games 15-minute city. Hunger Games. I won't cover Hunger Games because I don't think it's that great of a film, but it's definitely a proverb. It's prophetic about our future. Okay, trust me. Squid Games is another ripoff of Hunger Games. Great series, but morbid as hell. By the way, they're holding Squid Games here in Los Angeles. You want to be in the Squid Games, except you don't want to die? Come down and play this game with us. Whoa. Whether or not they have a huge piggy bank with money in it, I don't know. Probably. But conditioning humanity to fall in love with something that will be utterly terrifying process in the future. But remember what it used to be in the classic movies? In the classic movies, it used to be a village that had to sacrifice some virgin in the village to please Uther Pendragon or some other, fictitious character for the king, And so that's Hunger Games, moved up, 5 to 6 centuries from those old ideas, those old druid rituals of, we're going to make you sacrifice your young for us. It happens every day. So that's why I think these movies are very intense. THX 1138 will, I think, save another movie being created. It is the last of the evolutionary films of what could be in our future if we don't start owning our policies and our laws and, how things are managed in this world, right? So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It's got everything up there, including a top picks, which is my choice of stuff that would be easier to pass around to friends to kind of get them interested in the channel. Again, what we're trying to do here is expand everyone's mind, make you think. You don't have to agree with me at all, but just remember, if you're disagreeing with me, I got more circuits in your brain going than if you agree with me. That makes you question what you believe, and if you disagree with me, that's fine. You're double downing on what you do believe, and that's important and valuable to you, right? This isn't a game. This show is not a game. This show is not some stupid podcast. It's like, let's talk about Disney movies for 1 second. This is very serious business. All the episodes butt up together. And I wanted to say for those who have come on because of these movie reviews and you're like, what's this other crap around here? It hopefully is entertaining to your intellect, because that intellect isn't being stimulated anywhere else that I can name. So there's ways that they do get into your brain, and there's some great stimulation out there, but it'll be just a sector of your brain instead of the whole spectrum of your mind. The whole thing needs to be juiced, right? The way you make new brain cells is to solve problems. No other formula makes new brain cells. You must stress your synapse to make them procreate. If you don't, they just sit there and atrophy and die off. Because we're forced to ingest a lot of toxins that kill your synapse, you want to be creating new ones constantly. You can fight the algorithm by simply thinking. Okay, that's it. Think about your stuff. Get into the comments. Again, you guys have created tons of suggestions, which are on my list. Some of them take research, and I simply don't have a lot of time at this exact moment in my life to do proper research. So if I've told you your thing is on the list in the comments, it is still on my list, and it will happen. It just takes a little time for me to get back. And I got stuff on the list I put on there 2 years ago, but I will not do it. I will not do you the injustice of just throwing some piece of crap episode out there. I want to really get into why I think you suggested this particular subject or this person or something for me to cover. But all this stuff's on the website. To the Patreon and PayPal folks, thank you very, very much. You make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you on the next Deep Thoughts. Over and out.